back, can't you?
Use the mic.
No.
Use the
Use the mic.
Yeah.
Use the mic. I know, Laura. All right. Okay, I'll use the mic. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you kindly for coming. Let's just do this. Let's meet these guys and know them well and know what they were thinking when they were painting and what was going on in their world at the time. They turned the world upside down with this revolution. I need not tell you, we all live here. So tonight, let's start here. I love Howard Pyle, and I adore this painting. But Howard Pyle knew the ending of the story. He already knew in 1902 who won the war. So that's why he's got the general out in the front with no hat, and his hair blowing in the breeze, and not a bit of defense in front of him. But what is true about this painting and not romanticized is that's probably what they looked like and not that good. They were barefoot and ragged and hungry, and they were pitting themselves against the greatest fighting army and navy of all time. Someone has to pay for all of that. There's a bill to be paid, and we're going to start here. I fell in love with this painting when I was doing the research because it gives us the neoclassic feel that we want for the Age of Enlightenment, for what was going on in Europe, and then also what was going on in America. We have the Izards. Now, Mr. Izard is a second-generation colonist. He inherited an unbelievable Pyle, a fabulous plantation in South Carolina, enough so that he and his lovely wife could go off to do the grand tour, which at that time was Naples, Herculaneum, where they were making all of these marvelous discoveries, Versailles, the other one. And so what they're doing right now is they're sitting in Rome at a beautiful porphyry table. Now look what Copley does to that table. This is a John Singleton Copley picture. We'll kind of fade in and out with the 5 principal artists. There's just a wee shadow there. We'll come back to that with another painting. And in the background, you have a sculpture that those two are planning together. And they have the paper in front of them, and they're discussing it. And Copley was a good friend of theirs. They were all traveling. They were all on the grand tour together. And he was painting them, and he loved them, and they adored him. And so behind Ralph, we have this magnificent travertine column, which gives him authority and masculinity. It's a neoclassic device with an amphora off to the left, beautiful Greek amphora, showing the wealth of the family. The furniture, gilded, the drapery behind her, her gown, the expense of just the gown alone. So this little couple from South Carolina, seemingly, would go off to Europe, but when things got hot at home, he sold the plantation and he underwrote the South Carolina militia and gave the money to warships, because that's one thing we didn't have. So you have an example of the money and the wealth in America. You know, we think of everybody being, starving and because they looked like that first picture. Well, they did when they've been battling for weeks. But not everybody was living like that. Off to the right-hand side, you can see how Alice, painted here by Thomas Gainsborough, as Susie said, one of my absolute favorites. And you have a very different girl, don't you? If you look at the Copley, he captures her, that exquisite silk, that Belgian lace, her neckband, She's leaning on her hand, she's leaning in, she's listening to every word that he's saying, she adores him. And I picked that painting for her double chin. And then I learned a bunch more about them, and I find them fabulous. But the Gainsborough represents the fam that she was in a position to do this. She's a Delancey, which means she's a Van Cortlandt, which means she's a New Yorker. This is Dutch, Brahmin, wealth in the United States. Northern girl, Southern boy, a match. Tonight, we're gonna look at the 5 artists: John Singleton Copley, Benjamin West, Charles Willson Peale, Gilbert Stuart, and John Trumbull. Very, very different in their work, and we'll flip back and forth. I gave you their death date in all cases, because if you look at John Trumbull, you'll realize that he bridges the century and goes right into another era and becomes good friends with the French painter David, with Talleyrand, gets involved in the French Revolution. This man is everywhere in all places. All of them are multiply talented, some successfully, some less so. If we start with Charles Willson Peale, isn't he darling and fresh and innocent, so sweet? And he didn't necessarily want to go and fight the Revolutionary War, but he was a principal at Trenton and at Princeton, at the Battle of Princeton. We're going to refer back to those 2 battles over and over again. Crossing the Delaware, going to Trenton, beating the Hessians, going on to Princeton, winning at Princeton against Cornwallis and 8,000 British soldiers. And that's the turning point in the war. And he's a part of it. He was also at Brandywine and Germantown. He was a first lieutenant and a captain in the militia, and he didn't want any part of it. He really wanted to just be a painter. But when duty called, he served. And he became very close to George Washington, to Benjamin Franklin. He was a son of a liberty. We'll talk a little bit about that. He was also, among his accomplishments, an artist and inventor. He was a naturalist. He started the first natural history museum in Boston. He was a proprietor. He was the founder of the Pennsylvania Academy and a patriarch of a dynastic and artistic dynasty, and we'll see a little bit of that as well. The first time he paints George Washington is early on. This is 1772. We're already in the midst of altercation. We've already done the massacre in Boston, and Washington by this time is preparing to lead the troops. But when he paints him the first time, he paints him in his British military uniform because he served brilliantly in the French and Indian War. And the French and Indian War, of course, the English had won the war against the French, and then they wanted you as a colonist to pay the bill for it. And that's where we run into a snag, because the colonists didn't necessarily want to have to do that. And so it caused a little altercation. Is it stylized? Oh my God, yes. Did Washington look like that? No, he didn't do anything like that. And Martha, even Martha, just used to cringe. She loved the artist. She didn't always love what he did for George, and George wasn't so keen either. If you look at the next one, this is by this time, it's 1776. The Declaration of Independence has been written, and he paints in his lifetime 7 live portraits of George Washington. But off of that, he garners 60 different paintings. Well, when you repeat it like that, when you repeat a painting and you stylize it, every time you do it, it's less and less who the person is. He's just peddling them. And Gilbert Stuart will do the same thing. And so that's why we're kind of blessed or not blessed with lots of really mediocre paintings of George Washington. If you look at his hairline, and I don't know if anybody's ever bothered to take a look at that and analyze it. I just think that's dreadful. He can no more do hair than I can fly. So he gets the rest of it sort of. It's not in proportion, but we have to remember he's fighting in the field too. He's doing both things at once. So he isn't self-made. The family knew a painter and gave him some instruction. And then in the 1760s, he goes to work with Benjamin West in London. So that's where he does his formal training, and he comes back because of course we're all intimidated by the idea that the English can do it better. This is Washington at Princeton. Of course, we return to this idea that this is the turning point. And he was supposed to turn this out in 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks. He said, I will stand still for you for 2 weeks. I'm busy here. So he does. And this particular work has the Hessians down the side, as you can see. And of course, the Hessians have been defeated. That's a big deal. That German fighting force was formidable. So again, it's stylized. He's holding his sword. The battle's going on in the background. But still, Martha didn't like it. She said, do it again, and this time with the blue sash on, because the sash is his symbol of rule, and he is the commander-in-chief. So we do it again, and this is the one that raised, I'm looking at my notes, $21 million in 2023, the most expensive amount of money paid for an American work ever. So, and so Martha was right, I guess, is the point of painting. And in what you see, of course, is the cannon. He has his hand on the cannon. I know, Nancy, but still. I have a special softness for cannons because I love Henry Knox, so we'll keep it between us. Once again, this is one of those paintings where you kind of question it, but I had to put it in because I'm not going to talk about Lafayette tonight, but here's Lafayette. Who was his son? Washington didn't have children. Henry Knox and Lafayette were his children. They did whatever he told them to do, and he could trust them. And that wasn't always the case, and we'll see that tonight. So here they are with their unspeakable hairlines all together at Yorktown. And this is in the Maryland State House with a man named Tillman after the battle, obviously won. And here, once again, see, to my point, here's Henry Knox, and he's the youngest general, major general in the service, of course, until Lafayette. They were 22 years old when they were fighting this war, and expected to do Herculean things, Herculean projects. Peale, the artist, our artist, was also a very good friend of Franklin, and they became buds in the 1760s here in America, and then in London they would meet up again, and Franklin would give him, I thought this was so wonderful, a stuffed Angora cat for his natural history museum, because that was their passion together, and that was Franklin's contribution to him. The paintings, okay, all right, fine, they all liked him, it's great. So, and Thomas Jefferson, which I think is outstanding. I think this is the turning point for Peale in terms of artistic content. This is my favorite of the Thomas Jefferson. The wind is blowing through his hair. He's got that jagged jawline. He's handsome as a lord and utterly secure. And Peale captures it. He begins to see the interior of the person the way that Copley can see the interior and pronounce that. And you see it again here. This is Van Stuyven. So in 1780, now remember, the war's still on. We're not out of the woods until 81. Had it not been for this Prussian general, no one would have gotten anywhere on time. He taught them to march. Boys, line up, get on the same foot, listen to the fife and drum, and off they went. And they got there sometimes on time, sometimes not. But in this portrait, the personality is revealed. He was completely dedicated, completely available to his men. He taught them to say things in German that are unrepeatable. He was a tough warlord with these boys, and they used to call him Mars behind his back. They said he's the god of war. My all-time favorite for this round of presentation for Peale is this painting. I love how Timothy Matlack is sitting. I love the pose. Look at his confidence. He's completely and essentially American. He honors the sitter. He's a distinguished public career. He was a radical Whig. I want to be a radical. Matlack played an active role in revolutionary events in and around Philadelphia. He was an engrosser. He copied documents. This was so essential at the time, his beautiful handwriting. So on the table, we see his attributes. We see the Great Seal of Pennsylvania. We see the Constitution of Pennsylvania. He hand-lettered the Declaration of Independence, but even better, he led a rifle battalion at Trenton. So Trenton, remember, that's when we get rid of the Hessians. That's when we can finally put the lid on that, and he's very much part of that. So he can do all things. Also, it's interesting, on the table is his Bible, which may refer to his activity in founding the Society of Free Quakers, which meant that they could take up arms. You know, he'd been written out of the original group, but there was no way that he was not going to defend his country. I just think he's the man. And also, great outfit. My word. And here we have, of course, the Declaration of Independence. And this is the crescendo of the Age of Enlightenment. Locke, Rousseau, Kant, Diderot. It's all right here. And John Hancock wants you to know that he agrees. Loud boy, always in trouble, big handwriting. This is a self-portrait of Charles Willson Peale. This is not too long before he passed away. And in fact, it's the same year, like months within. And he looks out to the audience, and he wants you to analyze him as a person, his contribution, what he's done. He holds the tools of his trade. And while you're doing that, he's exploring his contribution, what he's done, how he feels about his work. My two favorite that I want to share with you are the artists in his museum. Where would he have done if there hadn't been this war? What would these five men have done? What would they have accomplished? They were very prolific. But what he really wanted to explore was trompe-l'oeil, the trick of the eye. So when you look at his Natural History Museum, which is really his first love, you have, there's some form of bird, and there's a mastodon bone. This was meat and drink. He loved this stuff. But when he pulls up the curtain, you have that trick of the eye, that sense that you can walk right down that gallery. So does he accomplish it? Almost, he does in a sense. But in this one, he really accomplishes it. Take a look at this one. His two darling boys. He had 4 sons. He named them all after great artists. In this case, we have Raphael up in the corner, right here, peeking around the corner. He was the natural historian. And then you have Titian in the foreground, and he was the artist. So you have two conversations going on in this. Number one, the boys turn around and say, would you like to come upstairs and see our studio? They're inviting you into the picture. And look what happens at the bottom. Look at the trompe l'oeil. There's a step. It's as though you could step right into that painting. That was his passion. Both those children look just like him. And the other vignette is they're turning around and their father's looking at them, and they turn around and say, sir, what did you say? What did you need? So he captures them in a now moment and invites you into their space. Benjamin West painted Peale when he came to study with him. No one is more generous than Benjamin West, and no one rides the fence the way that he does. He's the court painter for George III. What's a colonist doing, being the court raider? Sometimes I would read this, not being skilled in American history, and think, how did this happen? How did the irony alone? So what happens when he sends Peale back to America? He sends him with a symbol. On the right-hand side, you have Isaiah from the Sistine Chapel. Benjamin West would have known this like by the back of his hand. He spent his whole life in Europe. So what he did was take Isaiah's hand, reverses it, gives it to Peale, says, this is the instrument of your power. There's your paintbrush. You go back to America. You be the voice crying out in the desert like Isaiah. You bring art to them. That's how important it was to Benjamin West. So, and the portrait, of course, is sublime. So as we move on to Benjamin West, this is his self-portrait, also done shortly before his death. He's cast in shadow to let you know that he knows that his time is there, and he is using his arm almost as his talisman, and he holds a brush in his hand, a pen, and he's writing a document, who knows, perhaps his will. But once again, he's looking at you. He's engaging the audience. He brings you into the picture, and he makes it intimate. And he says, think about what I've accomplished, what I've done. This, of course, is in every Art 101 book that ever existed. How many of you have seen this picture before? Yep. 5 minutes. You get 5 minutes, and that's Benjamin West, and you have to identify it on the test, right? But it's so powerful. This is history painting, and it's the beginning of the popularity of history paintings, of documenting events. And it's twofold. It's the end of the French and Indian War combined with the death of General Wolfe. And so he combines both of them, which makes it not only a history painting, but a lamentation painting. So he's surrounded by his men. The man in the green, he's a frontiersman. He's got on buckskins and an unusual hat, is pointing out, yelling to General Wolfe, we've won, it's over, the war is over, it's too late. He's dying, General Wolfe is dying in the arms of his men. Like the 12 apostles, because there's usually a religious quotation somewhere, they each have a different expression. They respond to it differently. In the foreground, placed beautifully, is an Iroquois, because the Iroquois supported the British during the French and Indian War. And this is also a quotation. This is taken, Benjamin West took this off of The Last Judgment by Michelangelo. There's Adam. You see it with Rodin's Thinker. You see the same thing. They're contemplating mortality. And here he is, Adam, just thinking about what he's done, where he's going, what's going to happen next. And you have this wonderful pose of the Iroquois as he sees someone he has trusted passing into the next life. When I talk about a lamentation painting, I'm talking about this. That's a lamentation. It's not the deposition. It's not Christ coming off of the cross. It's something that's universal, that anybody can identify with. It's a mother holding her dead child. It's sorrow, the regret, and the reaction of the people around that. And also the concept of dead weight. Artists would study these and then they'd reinterpret them into their own designs. The Peter and Paul up at the top was just discovered in the 1980s, which is interesting. That's a nice part about art history. You just never know what's going to show up. So if we go back to one of his major works, this is the one they don't put in the art history book, the Art 101. And look at it, it's magnificent. This is Colonel Guy Johnson. He's an Irishman who comes to the New World and falls in love with a Mohawk maiden who can speak fluent English. And the two of them have a fair number of children. This is this Mohawk gentleman with a spectacular headgear standing behind Guy Johnson is either his younger brother, her younger brother, his brother-in-law, or it's possibly his son. Now this gentleman, whose name is Two Sticks of Wood Bound Together, which kind of makes me think it's his son, two different nations coming together in one, went to London, and when he was presented to George III and asked to kiss his ring, he said in beautiful English, "I choose not to kiss your ring, but I'd be happy to kiss your wife's ring." Yes, George III, imagine, and no one lost their head. So take a look at Guy's outfit too, the woven blanket, the exquisite chaps of sorts out of animal skin. He spent a good deal of his life apologizing to the Six Nations after the war. They never got what they should have received, and he was horrified. He didn't think that the Americans would be so cavalier with them, but we all know that story. This is Benjamin West's painting of Charles III. He looks rather callow and naive. He was his favorite history painter, his favorite court painter. He was very close to the family. It's such a contrast to the previous slide, huh? And at the time that West was painting in London, John Trumbull, who we'll look at a little bit farther down the road, was studying with West and painted a version of George Washington and a version of William Lee, his servant, who was given his freedom upon the death of George Washington, unlike the rest of George Washington's slaves. Stylized, yes. Romanticized, yes. Age of Enlightenment, no. And also, at the same time, Gilbert Stuart is he's also in England at this time. And this is the painting that gets him off the ground. This is the one that gives him notice. Because at this time, Joshua Reynolds is the head of the Royal Academy, and it's him that you want his attention for all of this. So he was in London from 1775 to 87, and then he returns to America. Now, he's a Tory, he's a royalist. He's in favor of the British. He didn't have any problem with the British at all. They didn't have any problem having him in their country for 10 years. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in contrast coming forward. This, of course, takes place in France. You have two famous artists. You have Benjamin West on the left-hand side. It's the Treaty of Paris. We all know it. The British didn't show up to sign the paper for the Treaty of Paris. They were pouting. So, but on our side, we have, of course, John Jay, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, a really interesting man. I don't know much about Henry Lawrence, but everything that I've read is fascinating. And of course, Temple Franklin, in a beautiful tableau that would have been a marvelous painting had their buds shown up. And then on the right-hand side is John Adams. Now, if you'll notice, he has his attributes in front of him. He's recharting the maps of America, as well he should, because he's instrumental in all of it. He's the one who put Washington's name forward. He's the one who worked on the Constitution, on the Declaration of Independence. There's no stone unturned. He's also the cousin to Samuel Adams. He's a son of liberty. In Boston, a highly charged small group of men who took on the British Empire. He's a pit bull. So here he is in his little stockiness, and you see in the background, of course, the laurel wreath of victory. And when you have that accent of Roman or Greek mythology, it's a neoclassic painting. So you have a neoclassic painting of him right here. He hated it. He hated wearing that wig. He hated posing for the picture. He hated everything about it. Abigail wrote him in a letter, I think it's a very nice likeness. But she was so sarcastic. How could you tell if she liked it or she didn't like it? So we move on to John Singleton Copley, who's the most complex. Look how wealthy he is. Look at the way that he's dressed. He painted everybody. He was wildly successful. And Peale, Charles Willson Peale, adored him, and so did Gilbert Stuart. Peale went to his house. He owned 20 acres on what is today Beacon Hill in Boston. He had everything. He had power, he had clients on both sides of the fence, he had it all. He's married to Susanna Farnham Clark. Farnham Clark, if you're an American historian, those are very important names. So he married up. He's self-made. He comes from an impoverished background. He studies in England. He studies with Benjamin West, but he's also gifted from a very, very early age. He's a very capable painter. Okay, here's why I love this. Look at this. Now this is Mrs. James Warren. Wouldn't you like to cross her? Look at that lip line. Look what she's doing with that. She's incredibly wealthy, and a wealthy American girl who's married to James Warren. They are patriots down to the bone. They have a falling out with John Adams because they don't think he's Republican enough. So you can only imagine. The interesting thing is as a female in this portrait, this is a woman who writes satire, who writes scathing sarcasm about the British. She's the girl you want to know. And instead of putting a pen in her hand, he has her arranging flowers. Well. But look how incongruous the flowers are to that mug. So he can capture his clients. It's so tongue-in-cheek. Now, he won't want me saying this, so we'll leave this in the room. This is the greatest thing he ever did. There's simply no question about it. Because look what it's painted. It's 1768, and we don't know which way this is going to go. So Paul Revere could be looking at his own death. He could be looking at the death of his family. He could be looking at dying on one of those prison boats that was off the coast of Boston. We just don't know what's going to happen. And he's a son of liberty. His daughter, after the fact, and when Paul Revere was older, said, oh, you should have worn a jacket, you should have had a chapeau, you should have dressed up. But you know, this guy was a merchant. He was a silversmith. He was the first entrepreneur, but even better, he was the first industrialist. And when the war was over and they hit the recession, he started a foundry and started casting bells. He just had it. He just had it in his fingertips of how to be free, how to use liberty wisely, how to be good to other people. He's French. How many of you are first generation? Who has a parent that was born in Europe? Anybody in this room? There we go, first generation Americans. That's what you have in common with Paul Revere. Huh, how many of you are second generation? Yeah, and there's us, right? Yeah. So he's first generation. The father was French. He came over to make his way. His father married up, a good merchant, a daughter of a merchant. He was apprenticed at a very early age to a silversmith. He made beautiful, as you know, beautiful silver services for the wealthy in Boston. But when the going got rough, he turned to pewter because it was cheaper to work. And so he's holding that pewter teapot in his hand, and there's that reflection we talked about in the very first slide. And he reflects. He reflects for us visually. He reflects as he looks out to you. He holds his chin in his hand because he just doesn't know what's coming next. And when the genie comes out of that teapot, they're going to unleash hell. After the massacre of Boston, he pinched this poster from another artist because he had the capacity to make lots of them. So he made many of them and sent them out, and it is, in some senses, propaganda. You have the British looking hard and tough, when in fact, some of those colonial boys were wrapping rocks in snow and throwing them at them and hitting them and making a fuss and causing an insurrection. But we don't see that on this side. We just see the dead and the dying and women and children, and yes, that happened too, but the thing was just erupting. And so when you pass out this kind of propaganda, you get a lot of support for it. Paul Revere really did save their lives, both of them. Samuel Adams on the right, John Hancock on the left. They were hidden in Lexington. Dr. Joseph Warren warned them. He got Paul Revere and he said, get out there, tell them the regulars are on their way in force, tell everybody to buckle up, this is it. And it was. And here we have them by Copley. Now, they're not foreshortened correctly. They're out of proportion. He's got the heads correctly done, but as you can see, they're imperfect. So you get two versions of him. Depends on what he's eating for breakfast. We're not sure. You know, protein levels. But he's, but his work is inconsistent. Some of it is incandescent, and some of it is just historical. I'm not despairing it. Thank God we have it. You know, we're lucky to have these representations. I'm going to go right to the war because we want to do this painting while I have you and you're not falling asleep. But this is the death of Dr. Warren at Bunker Hill. Now, Dr. Warren, Dr. Joseph Warren, was a son of liberty. He was the head of the spy ring. He was a dedicated patriot in every way, shape, and form. And when the battle broke on Bunker Hill, he put down his scalpel and picked up his musket, and he went out to the battle. And toward the end of it, he took a bullet in the head, and they lost him. He's the first martyr of the American Revolution. He's a founding father, and he would have given Washington a run for his money. He was 36 years old and perfectly capable of running this country. So we have him, and what Trumbull is doing. Now look at the year. This is after the fact. It's 87. But the great part of this work is Trumbull knew a lot of these men. He knew who they were. So you have the Irishman McCarty, who also was shot right at the end of the battle. We have Joseph Warren here. And we have this interesting man who is an Englishman who won't allow his own men to bayonet a dying warrior. And apparently that is a true story. And the beauty of these is that he was there. Trumbull was there. He fought in the war. Peale and Trumbull fought in the war. Trumbull would go out and get the faces if he could. He traveled up and down the East Coast after the war, finding the relatives of people who'd been in the battle or the men themselves, and he would do a portrait of them for his work, which was grand. Up at the top here, you have Howe and Clinton, who will take over at some point. And a close-up of the same, you see their portraits. And they all have a different reaction to the death, which makes it a lamentation. You have a martyrdom. You have a battle, in this case, that was lost to the Americans, but a Pyrrhic victory for the Brits. They lost 1,000 men, and Gage is going to get pulled in a couple of minutes and sent back to England. And on the right-hand side for dramatic effect is Thomas Grosvenor, who was a lieutenant and his, they say, servant. This man was his slave, his Batman at arms, and it's his reaction and shock at the death of Warren. There's also a British death, Pitcairn. Think of Pitcairn's Island beyond the Bounty. This is a relative, and he dies too. And he dies in the arms of his eldest son. So this also is very, very powerful. It's a multiple narrative, and you see both sides of the coin of war. This is John Trumbull. Here's Copley's version of painting of Dr. Joseph Warren. We probably covered it pretty well. Intelligent bloke. And here, the Sons of Liberty. So for our purposes, of course, Samuel Adams, Paul Revere, Joseph Warren, John Hancock are familiar, and those are the only ones we'll see tonight. So after Bunker Hill, there's an embargo, and this is sort of the children's version of what the coast of Boston must have looked like with the incoming British ships. But this is what they have done. This is what it really looked like. Over 250,000 vessels of various sizes at the war's outset, with the number nearly doubling by the end of the war. You have 800 men on each ship. There are going to be 25,000 British, 22,000 Hessians, a good number of Native Americans, and they're going to throw on at these boys who can't march in the beginning. It's scary. You kind of wonder when you read Rick Atkinson how they managed it at all. To end this embargo that's going on where they're starving out the British, you have Henry Knox, who's under 25, who goes to Saratoga Ticonderoga, and secures 59 pieces of artillery and schleps them down to Boston in January. It's unthinkable. It's like crossing the Delaware. It's the same kind of unbelievable feat. Dave and I were traveling. I don't know if I have time to say this. Dave and I were traveling last summer and came around a roundabout, and looked to the right, and there was the monument, one of the 59. We almost had an accident. We had to circle the roundabout again, stop the car, and get out and get a picture, because Henry Knox stood there. I have entered this stage of my life. Just magnificent. I was just thrilled. Okay, who's in charge here with all of this? Where are the British? So this is the Viscount Thomas Gage. He is, this is a painting by Copley, of course. He's the Commander-in-Chief in North America, the military governor of Massachusetts. And he doesn't want to enslave Englishmen, and he says so. It doesn't mean that he's a piece of cake. He's very tough. But he says to his constituents, you're asking me to enslave my own. He doesn't really get it. Plus, he's married to an American girl. See, he's pointing to all the things he commands. That's fine. All right, Thomas. So, but here's the wife, and she's divine. So, this is Margaret Campbell Gage. She's Greek, Dutch, English, and French. An all-American girl. And she's from New York. And they live differently in New York than they do in Boston. As we speak, as we sit here, it's the same thing, not much has changed. So here she is, and she's dressed as in sort of an a la Turcaille, Turkish style, because she comes from New York merchants who are trading in Asia and in Asia Minor. So she's up on the style. She has a magnificent Turkish belt. She has this fabulous headdress. She's leaning against her chaise. She's contemplating what's coming next. She's really American, married to the highest ranking officer in the colonies, Gage, and eventually she's going to have to be sent back to Britain. These are her neighbors when she moves to Boston during the embargo. How do you think that they accept her? Not that much, especially this one. These are Bostonian girls. They don't dress up like Turks. They don't do that. So she's sort of flamboyant and outspoken. They said that the worst fault that Gage had was that he was uxorious, which meant, of course, that he was dominated by too much affection for his wife. Yes. And look at her sweet face. So she gets caught up in something that I think is a lie. They say she tipped off Dr. Warren, who tipped off Paul Revere, who started Lexington and Concord, and they say it's her fault. It makes good nonfiction. It's not true. They had a spy. They didn't need her. They had plenty of spies that could have found that out. But she's a very wealthy woman. He's at the very end of Bunker Hill. He's going to send her back. Boston's a mess. She's on a ship that's full of people who have been wounded in the battle. It's a horrendous trip back home. Plus she's about 3 months pregnant. But before we get really sad for either one of them, they send Gage home at this time, but that's okay. That's okay. And there's a nice flat too in London. So they have that, and they have this nugget of a Georgian home. And so all is well. I think it's almost 7:30.
It is. You have a few more minutes though.
2 more minutes?
A few.
All right, a few. Okay, just go like this. All right. So what would be good about a story? Johnny Burgoyne is in the center. This particular work is done by Joshua Reynolds. Benjamin West will take his place at the Royal Academy. He's a dandy. He's captured as a dandy. He's having a glass of champagne 3 days before the battle at Princeton. He's staying with the Schuylers. in New York, and he thinks it's going to be a simple battle. But somebody didn't get the message, and his reinforcements never came. And so he lost the battle, was sent back rather shamefully to England. In fact, they swapped him. I can't remember if they swapped him for somebody. And goes back to England, where he produces plays and has parties and carries on with his life. And doesn't he just look like it? So, and then Clinton takes over for him, and he's rather vicious. Howe is a bit of a powder, and I don't care for that anyway, so I'm going to move on from that. And then there is, I do want to do this one. Let's do a little John Gilbert, because we have Stuart Gilbert. Gilbert Stuart, sorry, Howard. As you see his self-portrait, he's manic depressive. He struggles all of his life with that. He, of course, comes back to America. He's dead broke. He became an excellent. He painted 1,000 portraits and didn't have a pot to throw out the window when he died. Poor soul. So he comes back to America and says, well, everybody's painting George Washington and making a fortune. I need to do that too. And so that's where we get these big portraits of Washington that are so famous. The Lansdowne portrait, of course. And this is the one that's saved by Dolly Madison in 1812. And this is a portrait by Gilbert Stuart of that lovely lady. George Washington, the Vaughan Sinclair portrait, you know, it goes on and on and on. He did this one, and then he stopped in the middle of it and said, the Washingtons can't pay me what I'm worth, so what I'm going to do is just make copies of this and sell 75 of them. Yeah, I think that's called elastic demand, isn't it? In an econ class. So, but by this time, George Washington is an older man. He has terrible teeth. And so this whole program right here is George Washington in old age. And so you see a very different person. I want you to see who he really looked like. Oh, I'm going to go back to that one. But let's do this one. This is by Houdon, the sculptor, who also did Voltaire, French sculptor. And this is how George Washington is described, because there is no revolution without him. It's one of those situations where the right man arrives at the right time. A proper man, strong, outdoorsman, lack of bombast, a core of quiet self-belief, a man of principle, a repudiation of shallowness, slow to anger, but firm in his conviction. And that's Washington. He listened to his men, he kept his counsel. I did want to do this, which is kind of the polar opposite. So you have Johnny Burgoyne on one side, losing at Saratoga, and you have Horatio Gates on the other side by Gilbert Stuart. So you can see he's masterly. He's a magnificent painter. He just has a sorry life because of mental illness. But when there's a lovely, it's terrible. Horatio Gates says this about winning at Saratoga. If old England is not by this lesson taught humility, then she's an obstinate old slut, bent on her own ruin. So he has a big ego, and Gates thinks that he should replace Washington. So what Washington did was send him south against Cornwallis, which was kind of mean because he lost. But notice, this is the man himself with the ruffled hair and kind of the open jacket in the American uniform, as opposed to, you know, Mr. Fastidious drinking champagne before Princeton. When they finally, it's the painting of Surrender that was done by Trumbull for the 6th, for the rotunda, for the Capitol Rotunda, and you have in the center Gates, and Burgoyne offers him his sword at the end. No, we're gentlemen. You don't need to give me your sword. It's a horrible battle, Saratoga. And so they do that sort of a quasi-religious tap dance around each other, and then they get out the schnapps. So they each have a little something, and Gates toasts to George III, and Burgoyne toasts to George Washington. And you boys, honestly. And next to, right on the side there, is the Lafayette, named for Lafayette. It was a 12-pounder, roughly 400 yards round shot with a high bit of probability. This was a kind of a secret weapon for the Americans. In any case, there's all this camaraderie at this surrender, and it's after the fact. This is done in 1822. But Trumbull knew them. He knew these people still. He had a long life. So where are we going to close? What's the last one that we should do? You see, I prepared for 4.5 hours, but you didn't bring your pajamas. Let me see. Oh yeah, let's do this. 2 more, huh? All right, quick. So this, when you look at it, this is the kind of painting, you take your children to a museum, and it's filled with this kind of art, and all of a sudden, somebody in the family says, "Where's Jimmy's coat?" And so you're not really looking at the painting, and then somebody else yells out, "Where's Jimmy?" That's a day out in a museum with a bunch of little kids. Because it doesn't grab you necessarily unless you have some content. But look at the iconography. You've got Benjamin Lincoln in the center. Now this is Cornwallis. This is the end of the war. This is it. We're done. So Benjamin Lincoln. Why not Washington? Because Cornwallis is pouting in the House. He wouldn't come to the surrender. So he's here. Cornwallis is here. O'Hara, his second, is negotiating the peace with Lincoln. De Grasse, the French are all on this side because we don't win without the French. After Princeton, if they don't come, we're going down. So they show up with men and ships. De Grasse, head of the Navy, Rochambeau on the land, Cornwallis in the closet, O'Hara receiving or giving the surrender. In the background, you have Washington himself, and on the other side, some of our all-time favorites that we talked about tonight. We have Lafayette and von Steuben, and in the foreground, we have Knox and Hamilton. So the gang's all here. And so you know who the people are, and they would have, for up to 100 years after, they would have been more familiar. After that, this kind of history painting loses its content, and it fell out of favor and was no longer important. This is a highly romanticized version, as we know, and it's been, not maligned, but it's certainly been dismissed on some levels, when in fact, do you know who's surrounding Washington? These are the Marbleheaders. These are the guys from Marblehead, Mass, who joined together to be really, they're like the Secret Service. They would be like the Green Beret. They were a fighting force. They had the least amount of desertion. Washington could count on them, and they were indispensable. The indispensable Marbleheaders, and they not only took 2,500 men across the ice field in Delaware on Christmas Day because they understood the waters. But you forget when they get to the other side, the battle's not on the other side. They go down the ravine with the cannons and up the ravine. And then 8 more miles, and then, and one more time. And then they get to the battle and fight the battle and win at Trenton. So this is a magnificent painting, and in the background are Washington's 2 horses, Nelson, who he always rode when they were winning and turning over and the British were walking away. And Blueskin, his Arab, and he used to trade them off back and forth. He was a magnificent horseman. And so we have, of course, right here, George Washington. That's not what he was doing at all, but never mind. And then behind him, John Glover, who was the head of the Marbleheaders. I have to know more about them. I think they're fascinating. Mixed race, Hispanic, free black, white, Mishkelans, a little of everything. That's how we like it in America. That's it, darling. Thank you. 20 to 8. Do you have a question or two, or do you need to run home and get a martini? Nancy, darling.
Yeah, my first question. I have a question and a comment.
Yep.
So I'll give the comment first, and then I'll get to the question. Henry Lawrence was from Charleston, South Carolina. He's a very important person in South Carolina history. And he was a great botanist, and he's one of the first instances of tomatoes. Is Charlie Costello here tonight?
Is Charlie Costello here tonight?
No.
Is your tomato?
One of the first instances of actually growing tomatoes in the what would be the United States of America.
Oh, how wonderful.
And he's a very interesting character. I don't know much more about him, but the other question is, what is this Napoleonic business of shoving your hand in your
Yeah, I was gonna
and
ask the
having a
same
portrait
thing.
taken?
It is Napoleonic. I don't know, I have to look it up.
I think you should.
But it is Napoleonic, you're right.
It's all the way down.
Napoleon was following them.
He was later, he got painting. Wasn't that painting in 1822 though? It might have been, I'm not sure. Let's find out about this. That's a good question. Anything else? Another question, yes, sir?
You said you had confidence that Peale's paintings did not represent George Washington very accurately. What do you base the most accurate?
The Houdon, the sculpture.
Why?
In terms of a painting,
But why would you pick those? Just like, what's your basis?
the
that those-
sculpture, because he laid down flat on a bed, they put plaster on his face. So that's how we know they have him. And they put straws up his nose so he could breathe.
He was alive.
He was alive, and he let them do it. He was old. He gave up. Martha told him to lie down and put plaster on his face. That's what
Where did they do that? Where did they do that?
How did they do
Where?
it?
Where?
Well, Houdon, I'm not sure. He certainly wasn't in Paris. It had to be Mount Vernon. I think
Where
Houdon
is the
painted.
sculpture now?
Pardon?
Where's the sculpture now?
Where is the Houdon? I had it on the slide, Nancy.
It's
It's in Richmond, Virginia. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question.
Hi, Rosemary.
How are you doing? Oh, we chatted the other night. I was excited to come tonight, but
Thank you.
the painting that Peale did at Princeton, while they were in the middle,
Yes.
all of that, and it's in Nassau Hall, and it's on a wall, and I was told when I was there, we used to go to Princeton's campus a lot, but that while they were fighting, they shot through the windows and damaged the painting.
Yes.
Is that
That's
true?
true. And that painting was destroyed. It was destroyed it was ripped apart and then repaired. The loyalists did it after the fact.
But it's still there, I think.
Yes, they
Yeah.
repaired it.
I mean, I've seen it,
Yeah.
but I remember the story that,
I mean, that's.
yeah, they
whole
shot
thing.
through the window where it was hanging and it
Yes,
ripped his-
absolutely, absolutely true.
ripped the painting.
Yes. Anything else that I can?
Here,
Rudy.